A billionaire widower and wheelchair user, devoid of hope in love or his company, sees his life change completely when a humble new employee awakens forgotten feelings in him and transforms the fate of the business. Subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching from. Let's get to the story. The top floor of the corporate tower, with its 42 floors of mirrored glass, offered a privileged view of the sprawling metropolis of New York. But for Edward Morgan, 45, that view had become just a cruel reminder of how far one could fall. The deafening silence of his 300-square-foot office was broken only by the rhythmic metallic sound of his wheelchair wheels against the imported Italian marble. 6 months had passed since his life completely crumbled. The helicopter accident that claimed the life of Helen, his wife of 20 years, still echoed in his nightmares every night. She, who at 42 radiated natural elegance with her always impeccable brown hair and green eyes that sparkled when she spoke about her social projects, had left forever that March morning. Edward vividly remembered the last kiss they exchanged before she boarded to inaugurate an environmental education center in upstate New York, a project she personally coordinated. The helicopter plummeted due to a mechanical failure while flying over the Catskill Mountains. Edward, who was in the passenger seat, survived, but his legs would never function again. The doctors at Mount Sinai Hospital gently explained that spinal injuries were irreversible. Since then, the custom wheelchair made of carbon fiber and Italian leather had become his constant companion. Mr. Morgan, the hesitant voice of Marcia, his secretary for 15 years, sounded through the intercom. She was a woman in her 50s, with grey hair always tied up in a bun, who knew all of her boss's moods better than anyone. "Mr. Caldwell insists on speaking with you. This is the 5th call today." Edward took a deep breath, his brown eyes fixating on the framed photo on his solid mahogany desk. Helen smiling during their honeymoon in Maui, her white dress fluttering in the wind. Next to the photo, stacks of financial reports had remained untouched for weeks. "Tell Robert I'm not available," he replied hoarsely, running a hand through his graying hair that now fell messily over his forehead. Ecotech, the sustainable technology company Edward had founded 20 years ago, was silently crumbling. Shares had plummeted 40% since the accident, and employees were resigning en masse. The company that had once been a pioneer in renewable energy solutions in the US was now facing bankruptcy rumors. Investors bombarded his phone with desperate calls that he simply ignored. "Mr. Edward," Marcia insisted, her voice laden with maternal concern. "The board is pressing. They want an urgent meeting. Let them have the meeting without me," Edward replied, steering his wheelchair to the panoramic window. Down below, New York buzzed in its chaotic dance of traffic and skyscrapers. Millions of people struggling, surviving, building dreams. He used to feel part of that energy, that collective ambition that characterized the largest city in the US. Now he felt completely disconnected, as if observing life through a bulletproof glass that nothing could penetrate. The office, decorated by Helen with refinement and sensitivity, maintained details that told the story of 2 decades of business success. Diplomas and certifications covered an entire wall. Mechanical engineering from MIT, an MBA from Harvard Business School, international recognitions for innovation in clean energy. A cedar bookshelf housed trophies and plaques commemorating projects that changed the energy landscape in America. On the desk, a tablet displayed constant notifications of unread emails. Over 3,000 messages accumulated. Edward didn't even bother to check. He knew that most contained demands. Inquiries from investors, resignation requests, or buyout offers for the company at ridiculous prices. "My God, Helen," he whispered to the photo, "how would you handle all this?" Helen had always been his emotional anchor and his most trusted advisor. A graduate in business administration from Harvard and a specialist in social projects, she had a unique ability to see solutions where others saw only problems. Her advice, always given with that mischievous smile and delicate hands that gestured expressively, had guided Edward through all previous crises. The intercom buzzed again. This time, the voice was that of Robert Caldwell, Vice President of Ecotech and a friend for 15 years. Through the security system, Edward could see him at the reception. A tall man in his 50s, with dark hair slicked back and a perfectly tailored suit. Robert gestured nervously as he spoke with Marcia. "Edward, for God's sake, pick up!" Robert's voice sounded desperate through the intercom. "The company is bleeding money. We need to make urgent decisions." Edward had known Robert since college. They had built Ecotech together, facing all the challenges of the early years. Robert handled the administrative side, while Edward focused on technological innovation. It was a partnership that had worked perfectly for 2 decades. "Marcia, let Robert in," Edward finally conceded, smoothing his hair and trying to compose a minimally professional expression. Minutes later, Robert entered the office with hurried steps. His expression mixed genuine concern with growing frustration. He carried a brown leather briefcase stuffed with documents. "Ed, my brother," Robert approached, pulling up a chair to be at Edward's level. "We can't keep going like this. The company is collapsing." Edward stared at him with empty eyes. "And then, Robert? What do you want me to do? Pretend everything is fine? Keep pretending I can lead anything in this state? You're still the same brilliant man as always." Robert slammed his fist on the mahogany desk. "The wheelchair hasn't changed your intellectual capacity." "It's not about the wheelchair," Edward replied bitterly. "It's about the fact that everything that motivated me to get up in the morning died in that helicopter, along with Helen." Robert opened the folder and spread graphs and reports across the table. "Look at these numbers, Ed. In 6 months, we lost 42 key employees. $3 million contracts were cancelled. Suppliers are suspending deliveries due to lack of payment." Edward glanced superficially at the papers, but the lines and numbers seemed to dance before his eyes. His ability to concentrate, once his greatest weapon in the business world, had evaporated, along with his will to live. "Maybe it's better to sell after all," Edward murmured. "There's a foreign company interested, right?" "For half of its actual value," Robert exclaimed. 20 years of work being sold for pennies. Helen would never allow this. The mention of his wife made Edward clench his fists tightly. "Don't use Helen's name to manipulate me, Robert. I'm not manipulating. I'm reminding you of who you are." Robert stood up, walking to the window. "That woman believed in you more than you believed in yourself. She saw a man capable of changing the world through clean technology." The silence weighed heavily between them for long minutes. Edward knew Robert was right, but the pain was too great to allow reason to prevail. Every business decision, every project, every victory had been shared with Helen. Without her, everything felt meaningless. "I need time, Robert," Edward finally said. "Time is exactly what we don't have," Robert replied, packing the documents with abrupt movements. "But I'll try to hold it together for a few more weeks. Just don't ask me to watch our lives fall apart without doing anything." After Robert left, Edward remained alone with his ghosts. The New York afternoon was already showing signs of coming to an end, and the city lights began to flicker on like giant fireflies. He remembered how Helen loved to watch this moment of the day, when New York transformed from a grey metropolis into an urban constellation. His phone vibrated with a message from his sister-in-law. "Ed, it's been 6 months today. We're thinking of you." He typed a brief response, thanking her, but couldn't disguise the bitter irony of fate. 6 months that felt like 6 years of loneliness and self-destruction. As the shadows of night enveloped his office, Edward stood motionless by the window, contemplating a city that continued to thrive and pulse while he withered in his cocoon of pain and isolation. He didn't know that the next day, a young, recent engineering graduate would enter his life carrying not just a resume on plain paper, but also the key to awaken everything he believed he had lost forever. The typical September rain in New York fell in thick, persistent drops as Marina Morgan stepped off the bus at the corporate tower station, firmly holding a black plastic folder against her chest. At 28, she radiated a quiet determination that contrasted with her simple appearance. Straight brown hair tied back in a practical ponytail, almond-shaped eyes sparkling with sharp intelligence, and a navy blazer bought at a department store that she had saved for special occasions like this. Her low-heeled shoes, chosen more for durability than elegance, made a rhythmic sound against the wet pavement as she walked toward the imposing corporate tower. Marina paused for a moment in front of the main entrance, observing the flow of well-dressed executives who entered and exited effortlessly, all carrying leather briefcases and speaking on cell phones, in conversations that seemed to decide the fate of the financial world. "You can do it, Marie," she whispered to herself, repeating the words her mother, Constance, had said that morning before she left home. "You studied hard to be here." The truth was that Marina had lost her previous job just 3 weeks ago when the small environmental consulting firm where she worked closed its doors due to the economic crisis. EcoConsult USA, located in a modest office in Brooklyn, had been her first job after graduating in environmental engineering from NYU. Working there for 2 years had been a rich experience, but the company couldn't survive the competition from multinationals and the reduction of investments in sustainable projects. Marina carried not only a resume printed on plain paper, but also the weight of family responsibilities pressing on her young shoulders. Her mother, Constance Morgan, 52, had worked as a cleaner in a public hospital in South Brooklyn for 20 years. Widowed since Marina was 16, Constance had raised her 2 daughters alone, always emphasizing the importance of education as the only way to achieve social mobility. "Education is the inheritance that no one can take away from you," Constance used to say, even in the toughest times when money barely covered the basics. Marina's younger sister, Julia, 19, was in her 2nd year of medical school at NYU, achieved through hard work and a scholarship from Pro-Uni. Julia was the opposite of Marina in temperament. Where Marina was cautious and analytical, Julia was impulsive and dreamy. But both shared the iron determination inherited from their mother and the sharp intelligence that had taken them far, despite the circumstances. The family lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in East New York. The property, financed by the Federal Housing Administration over 20 years, represented years of sacrifice from Constance. Marina shared the room with Julia, where a small plywood desk served for both to study, first for college entrance exams, then for their respective universities. "Good morning," Marina greeted the security guard at the building's entrance, a middle-aged black man who watched her with curiosity. "I have an interview at Ecotech. 42nd floor, back elevator," he replied, pointing courteously. "Good luck, miss." Marina thanked him with a smile, a genuine smile. Her naturally friendly personality always created quick connections with people, a trait her mother said she inherited from her father. John Smith had been an electrician and died in a work accident when Marina was finishing high school. She held on to few but precious memories of him, especially his explanations about electrical circuits that sparked her initial interest in engineering. In the elevator, Marina shared the space with 3 executives discussing mergers and acquisitions in English. She understood the conversation perfectly. She had studied English on her own through free apps and YouTube videos during college, knowing that the language would be essential for her career. Her insatiable curiosity led her to question everything around her, a characteristic that some professors at NYU had praised as essential for a good engineer. When the elevator stopped on the 15th floor, where the Human Resources Department was supposed to be, according to the information she received over the phone, Marina confidently stepped out. But she soon realized there was some mistake. The hallways were different from what she expected, and there was no sign indicating HR. "Excuse me," she approached a staff member passing by with a stack of documents. "Could you tell me where the Human Resources Department is?" "This is the commercial area floor," the woman replied hurriedly. "HR is on the 12th floor." Marina thanked her and returned to the elevator, but this time pressed the wrong button out of nervousness. When the doors opened, she found herself on the 42nd floor, the top floor of the building. The hallways were completely different, wider with marble flooring, walls covered in fine wood, and a silence that contrasted with the bustle of the lower floors.
Can I help you?
The voice came from an elegant woman, around 50 years old, sitting behind an imposing reception desk. Her grey hair was impeccably styled, and she wore a skirt and blazer set that cost more than Marina's monthly salary. "Sorry, I got lost," Marina replied, showing no signs of intimidation. "I'm looking for HR for an interview." "Martha Jones," the woman introduced herself cordially. "I'm the executive secretary to the president. HR is on the 12th floor, but I can call them if you'd like." At that moment, a pair of double wooden doors swung open, and Edward Morgan appeared in his wheelchair. Marina observed him naturally. A middle-aged man, slightly disheveled grey hair, brown eyes that carried a deep sadness, wearing a wrinkled white dress shirt and dark dress pants. His carbon fiber wheelchair indicated considerable financial resources. "Martha, did you see the reports on—" Edward stopped upon noticing Marina. It had been months since he had seen new faces on that floor, let alone someone so young. "Good afternoon," Marina addressed him directly, without any trace of pity or discomfort in her voice. "I'm looking for the Human Resources Department. I think I got lost in the elevator." Edward studied her for a few seconds. The ease with which she spoke to him was surprising. He was used to looks of pity, whispers in the hallways, and that exaggerated kindness people used when they didn't know how to deal with physical disabilities. "12th floor," he replied, his voice hoarse from lack of recent use. "Thank you." Marina smiled and turned to return to the elevator. "Wait," Edward called out impulsively. "What kind of interview?" Marina turned back, noticing the genuine interest in his eyes. "For an administrative assistant. Recent graduate in environmental engineering, but I need a job while I look for something in my field." "Environmental engineering?" Edward repeated, his analytical mind awakening for the first time in months. "Where did you graduate?" "NYU," Marina replied with evident pride. "I defended my thesis on optimizing solar energy capture systems in residential buildings." Martha watched the conversation with growing interest. It had been months since she had seen her boss show curiosity about anything work-related. "Interesting," Edward murmured. "Ecotech works with sustainable technology, renewable energy, capture systems, energy efficiency." "I know," Marina politely interrupted. "I researched the company before coming. You were pioneers in integrated solar panels in the USA. The Sobradinho solar plant project was revolutionary." Edward was surprised. Few job candidates took the time to research the company deeply, especially for a basic administrative position. "How did you know these details?" he asked. "I read your doctoral thesis on hybrid energy systems," Marina replied simply. "It's available in the digital library at NYU. Very impressive, especially the part on integrating different renewable sources." Martha suppressed a smile. It was the first time in months she'd seen a spark of genuine interest in Edward's eyes. "You read my thesis?" Edward asked incredulously. "When I decided to apply here, I wanted to really understand what the company did," Marina explained. "Not just what's on the official website, but the philosophy behind the projects. Your approach to economic sustainability, combined with environmental responsibility, is exactly what I believe the USA needs." Edward remained silent for a few moments, processing that unexpected conversation. It had been months since anyone had spoken to him about work in such a natural and informed way. "Martha," he addressed the secretary, "cancel her interview with HR." Marina felt her heart race, thinking she had made some mistake. "The interview will be here," Edward continued. "Now." "Mr. Morgan," Martha diplomatically intervened, "perhaps it would be better to schedule for another time." "No," Edward was firm. "Now, please, bring us coffee." Marina followed Edward to his office, observing the details as she walked. The walls were decorated with diplomas and certifications, shelves filled with technical books and trophies that told decades of business success. But she also noticed piles of seemingly abandoned papers, plants that needed watering, and an overall atmosphere of neglect. "Have a seat," Edward indicated a leather armchair in front of his desk. "Tell me about your previous experience." Marina took a deep breath and began to narrate her journey at EcoConsult USA, talking about environmental impact analysis projects. Consulting for small, Marina had always been passionate about sustainable certifications and feasibility studies for implementing clean technologies. Her passion for the subject was evident in every word. "Why are you applying for an administrative position if you have a background in engineering?" Edward asked. "Because I need to work," Marina replied with brutal honesty. "My mother is a cleaner, my sister is in medical school, and our bills don't pay themselves. I'd rather work in something that isn't my main area than be unemployed, waiting for the perfect opportunity." Edward admired her frankness. In his experience, few candidates were so direct about their financial motivations. "What if I offered you an opportunity in the technical area?" he asked impulsively. "It would depend on the opportunity," Marina replied, keeping her feet on the ground. "But I confess it would be a dream to work on sustainability projects at a company like Ecotech." Martha entered with a tray of coffee, discreetly serving both of them. Marina politely thanked her, noting that it was the most expensive coffee she had ever tasted. "The company is going through difficulties," Edward said, deciding to be transparent. "We lost important contracts, valuable employees left, and our financial situation is complicated." "Every crisis represents an opportunity," Marina replied without hesitation. "Especially in sustainability. The market in the US is just beginning to wake up to clean technologies. Companies that survive the current crisis will be positioned to lead the next growth cycle." Edward watched her with renewed interest. There was something in her perspective that reminded him of his own passion in the early years of Ecotech. The interview stretched on for 2 hours, turning more into a technical discussion about the future of renewable energy in the US than a formal evaluation. When it finally ended, Edward was sure he had found something or someone special. Marina's first Monday at Ecotech began at 7:30 in the morning, when she arrived at the still empty and silent building. Her excessive punctuality was a habit developed over years of night studies and part-time jobs. She knew that arriving early provided precious moments of tranquility to organize her thoughts and plan her day. "Good morning, Marina." Martha greeted her with a maternal smile when she arrived an hour later. "What dedication! Mr. Morgan usually arrives around 9. Marina had been hired as a technical assistant, a hybrid role created specifically for her by Edward. Her responsibilities included organizing technical documents, assisting in project analysis, and managing correspondence. The salary was modest, $800 a month, but represented renewed hope for her family. "Mom, I got it!" she had shouted over the phone the previous Friday when she received the confirmation. On the other end of the line, Constance cried with emotion in the hospital locker room where she worked. "I knew my daughter was special," Constance had responded with a choked voice. "Your father would be so proud." Julia also celebrated in her characteristic way. "Not you can lend me money when I'm broke at the end of the month." Marina's office was in a smaller room adjacent to Edward's, overlooking the commercial buildings on Fifth Avenue. A light wood desk, desktop computer phone, and 2 empty shelves made up the environment. On the wall, she placed a single photo, her graduation from NYU, hugging Constance and Julia, all smiling proudly. Her first days were dedicated to organizing an impressive document chaos. Piles of contracts, technical reports, client correspondence, and financial documents were scattered without apparent criteria. Marina applied her diligent student methodology. She categorized, cataloged, and digitized everything into detailed spreadsheets. "How did you manage to find anything here?" she asked Martha during the coffee break. "In the last few months, no one was looking for anything," Martha replied sadly. After the accident, Mr. Edward lost interest in everything. The company was running on autopilot. Marina began to understand the scale of the crisis. Water cooler conversations revealed that more than 40 employees had resigned in the last 6 months. The research lab was practically empty, with millions of dollars worth of equipment sitting idle due to a lack of active projects. "It's sad to see a company with so much potential falling apart like this," commented Carlos Henry, a 35-year-old electrical engineer who had worked at Ecotech for 10 years. He was one of the few veteran employees who remained, driven more by loyalty than by the expectation of professional growth. "What exactly happened?" Marina asked during lunch in the company cafeteria. "Edward was obsessed with innovation, always investing in research and development," Carlos explained, absent-mindedly stirring his salad. Helen, his wife, handled the administrative and financial side. She had an incredible vision for business. When she died, it was as if half the brain of the company had disappeared. Marina absorbed this information silently, beginning to piece together a complex puzzle about Ecotech's history. During the afternoons, when Edward isolated himself in his office, she took the opportunity to talk to old employees and better understand the projects developed by the company. It was on a Thursday, during her second week of work, that Marina made her first unsettling discovery. She had stayed late organizing old files when she decided to print a financial analysis report that Edward had requested. The printer on her floor was malfunctioning, so she went down to the 15th floor to use the equipment in the sales department. When she reached the printer, she found a pile of documents forgotten by some hurried employee. Her natural curiosity led her to quickly flip through the papers to see if she recognized any important information that should be returned to its owner. It was then that her trained engineer's eyes for data analysis caught something strange. The documents contained reports of expenses and investments from the last 2 years, but the numbers didn't make sense. Huge bank transfers to external consultancies without detailed specifications. Supply contracts with inflated values. Payments to companies for which she couldn't find records of work performed. "How strange," she murmured, checking if she had read the values correctly. Marina discreetly photographed some pages with her phone and took the documents back to the sales floor. As she left them where she found them, during the crowded bus ride home, her mind couldn't stop analyzing the numbers. Her engineering background had included courses in financial management and cost analysis, and something was definitely wrong with those reports. In her small apartment in East New York, while Constance watched her favorite soap opera and Julia studied anatomy, Marina opened her personal laptop and began organizing the data she had photographed. She created a simple spreadsheet, entering values and dates, searching for patterns that confirmed her suspicions. "Mary, are you still working?" Constance asked, bringing a cup of black coffee. "It's almost 11 at night." "Just finishing something, Mom," Marina replied, not wanting to worry her family with premature speculations. "Be careful not to work yourself to death at your first job," Julia commented without looking up from her anatomy book. "Impressing the boss is important, but you have a life outside the office." Marina smiled at her sister, but internally she knew this went beyond impressing Edward. There was something deeply wrong with Ecotech's finances, and her conscience wouldn't allow her to ignore the situation. The following Friday, Marina arrived even earlier at the office. At 7 in the morning, with the building practically empty, she accessed the company's internal system to see if she could find more information about the suspicious transactions. Her technical training had included basic digital security concepts, and she knew how to navigate corporate systems without leaving suspicious traces. What she discovered left her even more worried. The irregular transfers were not isolated events, but a systematic pattern that extended over 2 years, always signed by Robert Caldwell, the vice president, and apparently authorized by Edward, although Marina suspected that many of these authorizations were made after the incident. "Marina?" Edward's voice startled her. She quickly closed the system windows and turned to find him at the door of her office. "Good morning, Mr. Morgan," she replied, trying to disguise her nervousness. "You arrived early today." "I couldn't sleep," Edward admitted, wheeling closer to her desk. "Have you noticed anything strange at the company? Employees acting differently, conversations stopping when you approach?" Marina felt her heart race. Could it be that Edward suspected something too? "Actually," she began cautiously, "yesterday I found some forgotten documents in the printer that caught my attention." Edward watched her intently. What kind of documents? Marina took a deep breath, deciding to trust him. Financial reports with transfers that seemed unusual. "Show me," Edward said simply. Marina hesitated for a moment, then opened the photos on her phone and showed them to Edward. She watched his expression gradually change from curiosity to surprise, then to a cold anger that darkened his eyes. "Where exactly did you find this?" he asked in a controlled voice. "In the printer on the 15th floor. They seemed forgotten by someone," Marina explained. "Mr. Morgan, I don't want to create problems. Maybe I'm misinterpreting the numbers." "No," Edward interrupted, studying every detail of the images. "Your interpretation is correct. These transfers are irregular." The silence weighed between them for a few minutes. Marina could see Edward's mind working, processing information, and reaching painful conclusions. "Marina," he finally said, "I need you to help me with something very important. But first, I need to be sure I can trust you completely." "You can," Marina replied without hesitation. "This could be dangerous," Edward warned. "If I'm right about what these documents represent, very powerful people are involved. People who won't hesitate to harm anyone who threatens their interests." Marina thought of her family, the bills that needed to be paid, the stability she had finally achieved. She also thought of her father, John Smith, who always said that honesty was the only treasure that no one could steal. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Edward smiled for the first time since she met him, a sad but genuine smile. "Let's find out who is stealing from my company," he said. "And we'll do it very, very carefully." At that moment, Marina had no idea she was about to embark on the most dangerous and transformative adventure of her life. Her decision to trust Edward and help him would trigger a series of events that would not only save Ecotech, but also forever change the fate of both. The weekend passed slowly for Marina, who divided her time between helping Constance with household chores and obsessively thinking about the documents she had discovered. On Sunday night, while preparing her outfit for Monday, Julia noticed her restlessness. "Mary, you've been acting strange since Friday," her younger sister observed, sitting on the bed they shared. "Did something happen at work?" "Nothing much," Marina lied, not wanting to involve her family in her worries. "I'm just trying to adjust to the new job." "Liar," Julia retorted with the knowledge that only sisters possess. "You have that look on your face, like when you found out Marcello was cheating on the tests at the prep school." Marina smiled, despite the tension. Julia was right. She always became visibly upset when she discovered any injustice or dishonesty. On Monday, Marina arrived at the office with a mix of anxiety and determination. Edward was already in his office when she arrived, surrounded by piles of old documents that he had apparently spent the weekend reviewing. "Good morning," he greeted her, his eyes revealing that he had also slept little. "I need to show you some things." Marina approached Edward's desk, where he had organized the suspicious documents he had managed to locate in the company's files chronologically. "Look at this." Edward pointed to a series of bank transfers. "It started exactly 2 years and 3 months ago. Always at the end of the month, always to the same consulting firm. Southern Strategic Consulting Limited," Marina read aloud. "Do you know this company?" "I've never heard of it," Edward replied bitterly. "And look here, who authorizes all these transfers?" Marina followed his finger to the digital signatures. All of them bore the name of Robert Caldwell, with a secondary authorization attributed to Edward, but the dates didn't make sense. "This one here, for example," Edward indicated a specific document. "It's dated April 15th. On that day, I was hospitalized at Mount Sinai Hospital in a medically induced coma after my second spinal surgery. Marina felt a chill in her stomach. So, someone forged your authorization? Not just that one. From what I managed to verify over the weekend, at least 12 transfers were authorized in my name during the period when I was completely incapacitated to make any decisions. The gravity of the situation began to become clear to Marina. This was not just about poor financial management, but a deliberate scheme of embezzlement. "Mr. Morgan," she said carefully, "have you talked to Robert about this?" Edward was silent for a long moment, looking out the window at the morning bustle of New York. "Robert has been my friend for 15 years, he finally replied. "We built this company together. He was my best man at my wedding, was with me in the hospital after the accident. He's one of the few people I've always trusted blindly." Marina understood the pain behind those words. Questioning Robert meant questioning one of the last solid foundations left in Edward's life. "But you have doubts," she gently observed. "I do," Edward admitted reluctantly, "and it's killing me inside." Marina pulled up a chair to sit beside him, instinctively offering human closeness in a difficult moment. "What do you propose we do?" she asked. "Let's investigate discreetly," Edward decided. "First, we need to find out if this Southern Strategic Consulting actually exists and what services it supposedly provides for ecotech." Marina spent the morning researching the consulting firm. She used public databases, regulatory agency websites, and even corporate social networks. What she discovered was disturbing. The Southern Strategic Consulting existed only on paper, with an address in a virtual office in downtown New York and an active business registration for exactly 2 years and 4 months. "It's a shell company," Marina reported to Edward during lunch, which they decided to have in his office for privacy. "No registered employees besides the partners, no official website, no project or client history beyond ecotech." Edward mechanically chewed his sandwich, absorbing the information. "Who are the partners?" he asked. Marina consulted her notes. "Marcus Caldwell and Fernanda Caldwell." Edward's fork stopped in midair. "Caldwell? Like Robert?" "I looked that up too," Marina continued, her voice growing more serious. "Marcus is Robert's son. Fernanda is his daughter-in-law." The silence that followed was thick and painful. Edward placed the fork on the plate and ran his hands over his face, as if trying to massage away the headache that was forming. 15 years, he murmured. 15 years of friendship, trust, and building together. Marina watched Edward struggle with the betrayal. His technical training had taught him to analyze data objectively, but his human sensitivity made her understand the emotional dimension of that discovery. "Maybe there's an explanation," she suggested, although she didn't really believe it. "Maybe," Edward agreed without conviction. "But we need more evidence before drawing any definitive conclusions." During the afternoon, they developed a plan for deeper investigation. Marina would use her access to internal systems to map all suspicious transactions, while Edward would discreetly review contracts and authorizations filed in his office. "I need to warn you," Edward said seriously, "that if our suspicions are correct, Robert will eventually realize we are investigating. And if he is capable of stealing from the company, he might be capable of other things to protect himself." Marina felt a shiver, but her determination remained firm. "I understand the risks." "Does your family know where you work?" Edward asked. "They do." "If something happens to me, you should immediately contact the police and a lawyer. I have a contract at home that guarantees your legal and financial protection." The seriousness of the situation hit Marina completely. They were not just organizing papers. They were uncovering a conspiracy involving millions of dollars and a devastating personal betrayal. That night, Marina returned home with her mind racing, During the simple dinner of rice, beans, and chicken that Constance had prepared, she could barely participate in the family conversation. "Daughter, you're very quiet," Constance observed. "Is everything okay at your new job?" "It is, Mom. I'm just learning a lot of new things," Marina replied, technically telling the truth. Julia, who was studying for a biochemistry exam, looked up from her books. "Mari, you know you can talk to us about anything, right?" "I know, Ju. Thank you." Later, lying in the narrow bed she shared with her sister, Marina stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. She thought about her father, John Smith, and how he had faced difficult situations while always maintaining his moral integrity. She also thought about Constance's years of sacrifice to provide education for her daughters. "You will do the right thing," she whispered to herself in the dark, repeating a phrase her father used to say. On Tuesday, the investigation intensified. Marina discovered that the pattern of irregular transfers had significantly accelerated after Edward's accident. In the 3 months he was completely incapacitated, over $2 million were transferred to accounts controlled by the Caldwell family. "They took advantage of your vulnerability," Marina said indignantly, showing the spreadsheets she had created. Edward analyzed the data with a coldness that surprised her. His pain was transforming into professional determination. "There's something else," he said, opening a locked drawer in his desk. "I found this last night." It was a copy of a document Marina hadn't expected to see, a proposal to sell Ecotech to a foreign investment group, dated just 2 weeks ago. The proposed amount was less than half the actual value of the company, and the proposal was signed by Robert as authorized legal representative. "He's trying to sell the company," Marina whispered, incredulous. "For a fraction of its real value," Edward added. "And look who it is, the intermediary of the transaction." Marina read the name of the intermediary company, Southern Strategic Consulting, LLC. They are orchestrating everything, she realized. They drain resources from the company to weaken it financially, then facilitate a low-price sale, probably receiving hefty commissions. Edward nodded gravely. "And I would be portrayed as an unstable president, unable to manage the company after the personal trauma." The conspiracy was more elaborate and cruel than either of them had initially imagined. Marina felt a mix of anger and determination growing in her chest. "What do we do now?" she asked. Edward looked at her with an intensity she had never seen before. "Now, my dear Marina, we counterattack." Wednesday began with a palpable sense of danger in the air. Marina woke up earlier than usual, disturbed by a restless dream where men in suits were chasing her family through the streets of East New York. By 5:30 in the morning, she was already drinking black coffee in the small kitchen of her apartment, watching Constance prepare for another day of work at the hospital. "Honey, you look tired," Constance observed, adjusting her light blue hospital uniform. "Not sleeping well?" "Just an adjustment period, Mom," Marina lied, forcing a reassuring smile. "I'll get used to the new routine soon." Constance approached and gently touched her daughter's face with maternal affection. "You've always been my most worried girl. Since you were little, you've carried the weight of the world on your shoulders. I learned from you," Marina replied, kissing her mother's forehead. Julia appeared in the kitchen still in her pajamas, hair messy and eyes sleepy. "Good morning." "Morgan family," she yawned, heading straight for the refrigerator. Do you have a test today?" Marina asked, trying to keep the conversation normal. "Cardiovascular anatomy," Julia replied, pouring herself some orange juice. "I'm going to spend the whole day memorizing names of arteries that no one should have to memorize." Marina smiled genuinely for the first time. In days, Julia's ability to dramatically complain about her studies always amused her. On the bus to work, Marina noticed something that made her uncomfortable. A man in a dark suit, sitting 3 rows behind her, looked familiar. She was sure she had seen him on the same bus the day before, even though she had left home at a different time. When she got off at the corporate tower station, she discreetly checked if he got off too. He did. Paranoia, she murmured to herself, but mentally noted the detail. At the office, Edward was already working when she arrived. On his desk, new documents were organized in meticulous piles. "Good morning," he greeted her, but his expression was tense. "We have problems." Marina approached, feeling her stomach tighten. "What kind of problems?" Edward showed her a printed email, received in his personal account during the night. The sender was anonymous, and the message was direct and threatening. "Edward, you should focus on your recovery instead of getting involved in matters you don't understand. Accidents can happen again, and next time you might not be so lucky. Stop snooping in old documents." Marina felt a chill run down her spine. "They know we are investigating." "Apparently," Edward confirmed, his voice controlled but with a cold anger underneath. "But look at this." He showed her a second email. This one directed to Marina's corporate address, Marina Morgan. The new employee should focus on keeping her job instead of getting involved in dangerous situations. Your family in East New York could become vulnerable if you continue interfering where you shouldn't. Marina's blood ran cold. They specifically mentioned her family and the neighborhood where they lived. "How did they get my corporate email?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "We have an internal problem," Edward replied gravely. "Someone inside the company is monitoring our activities and reporting to Robert." Marina sat heavily in the chair, the reality of the situation hitting her fully. It was no longer just about uncovering financial irregularities. It was turning into something potentially dangerous for her family. "Marina," Edward said gently, "if you want to back out of this investigation now, I will completely understand. You didn't sign up for this when you accepted the job." Marina was silent for a long moment, thinking. Images of Constance leaving early for work, of Julia studying late to fulfill her dream of becoming a doctor, of her father who always emphasized the importance of honesty flashed through her mind. "My father died in a workplace accident," she finally said. "We found out later that the company knew about the safety risks and chose to ignore them to save money. No one was held accountable. No family received adequate compensation." Edward listened attentively. "I always promised myself that if I were ever in a position to make a difference, to prevent harmful people from hurting others, I wouldn't back down," Marina continued, her voice gaining determination. "I won't start now." Edward smiled for the first time that morning, a smile of genuine admiration. "Then let's take special precautions," he said. "From now on, our investigation will be even more discreet, and we will implement security measures." They spent the morning reorganizing their strategy. Edward used his contacts in the corporate security field to discreetly install a hidden camera in his office and check for bugs or monitoring devices. Marina changed all her corporate passwords and began saving important documents in a personal cloud account accessible only outside the workplace. During lunch, which they again had in the office for safety, Edward revealed new findings. "I managed to access some old files from Helen," he said, his voice laden with emotion. "Apparently, she had started to suspect Robert in the months leading up to the accident." Marina stopped eating, giving her full attention. "I found her notes questioning certain transactions. She had scheduled several meetings to discuss financial irregularities, meetings that never happened because she died before." "Do you think Robert knew she was investigating?" Marina asked. "It's possible," Edward replied somberly. "Helen was meticulous with numbers. If she suspected something, she would eventually uncover the truth. The unspoken implication hung in the air between them. Was the accident really an accident?" "We can't think that way," Marina said, reading his thoughts. "Not without concrete evidence." "You're right," Edward agreed. "But that increases the urgency of our investigation." During the afternoon, Marina focused on mapping out the entire network of companies connected to Southern Strategic Consulting. Using public databases and cross-referencing information, she discovered that there were at least 4 other shell companies linked to the Caldwells, all created in the last 2 years. "It's a much more elaborate scheme than we imagined," she reported to Edward. "They've created an entire structure to siphon resources from ecotech." Edward analyzed the diagrams Marina had created, showing the connections between the companies. "How much do you estimate has been diverted in total?" he asked. Marina consulted her spreadsheets. "From the numbers I could trace, approximately $12 million in the last 2 years. Edward closed his eyes, absorbing the impact. 12 million was enough to explain much of Ecotech's financial difficulties. "Do we have enough evidence to go to the police?" Marina asked. "Almost," Edward replied. "But we need something that definitively proves the connection between Robert and these shell companies. Documents that show his direct involvement in the scheme." It was then that Marina remembered something important. "Does Robert have physical access to the company's files outside of business hours?" she asked. "He does. Why?" "If he's operating such an elaborate scheme, he must have physical documents stored somewhere. Original contracts, banking agreements, maybe even communications with the foreign investor group." Edward immediately understood the suggestion. "Are you proposing we break into his office?" "Not break in," Marina corrected. "I work here legitimately. I can stay after hours to finish an urgent project and take a look at documents that might be accessible." "It's risky," Edward warned. "Everything we're doing is risky," Marina replied. "But it's our best chance to get irrefutable evidence." Edward considered the proposal for a few minutes, weighing risks and benefits. "If we're going to do this," he finally decided, "let's do it right. Tonight, after all the employees leave. I'll stay with you to ensure your safety." Marina nodded, feeling a mix of fear and determination. She knew she was about to cross a line that would change everything, but she also knew she couldn't back down now. At 7 in the evening, the building was practically empty. Only night security and cleaning staff roamed the halls. Marina and Edward had remained in their offices, working on legitimate projects until they were sure Robert had left. "Ready?" Edward asked, wheeling himself to the door. "Ready," Marina confirmed, though her heart was racing. They headed to Robert's office on the 38th floor. Edward used his master key as president to open the door, and they quietly entered the space. Robert's office was imposing, a mahogany desk, shelves filled with management books, diplomas on the walls, and a panoramic view of New York. Marina began carefully examining the documents on the desk, while Edward checked locked drawers. "I found something," Marina whispered after 15 minutes of searching. In a partially hidden drawer behind the desk, she had discovered a folder containing documents that confirmed her worst suspicions. Signed contracts between Robert personally and the shell companies, schedules of planned bank transfers, and more shockingly, correspondence detailing the complete plan to force the sale of Ecotech. "My God," Edward murmured, reading the documents. "They planned everything from the start." Marina photographed each page with her phone, ensuring they would have copies of all the evidence. It was then that they heard the unmistakable sound of elevators opening on the floor. "Someone's coming," Marina whispered, panic rising in her voice. Edward quickly put the documents back in the drawer exactly as they were. "We need to leave, now." They exited Robert's office and quickly made their way to the elevator, but it was too late. The doors opened to reveal Robert Caldwell, accompanied by 2 men in suits that Marina didn't recognize. "Edward," Robert said with a forced calm that did not disguise the anger in his eyes. "Working late?" "Just like you, apparently," Edward replied, maintaining his composure. Robert looked directly at Marina, his eyes cold and calculating. "And our new employee is also putting in extra hours?" What admirable dedication. Marina felt a chill run down her spine, but forced a professional smile. "Good evening, Mr. Caldwell." "Good evening, Marina," Robert replied, pronouncing her name in a way that sounded almost like a threat. "I hope you're enjoying your work here. It would be a shame if something happened that forced you to look for another job." The tense silence lingered for a few seconds that felt eternal. Finally, Edward broke the impasse. "Come on, Marina. It's past time for us to go home." As they descended in the elevator, Marina felt Robert's eyes burning into her back through the glass doors. She knew they had crossed a point of no return, and from that moment on, the real battle was just beginning. The next morning, Marina woke up before the alarm with a sense of urgency that made her jump out of bed. The encounter with Robert the night before had made it clear that they no longer had time for discreet investigations. He knew they knew, and now it was a race against time. "Mari, are you okay?" Julia asked sleepily, noticing her sister's agitation. "It's 5:30 in the morning." "I'm fine, Ju. Go back to sleep," Marina replied, already heading to the bathroom. During her quick shower, her mind was racing with plans. The photos she had taken of the documents in Robert's office were explosive, but they needed more evidence to ensure the scheme was fully exposed and that Robert couldn't destroy evidence or escape. On the bus to work, Marina again noticed the same man in a suit from the last 2 mornings. This time, she decided to test her suspicion. At the corporate tower station, she deliberately took a longer route to the building, making several stops at shops. The man followed her, discreetly confirming her worst suspicions. "They are watching me," she murmured, feeling a mix of fear and anger. In the office, Edward had already been working for hours. His desk was covered with new documents, papers he had spent the night organizing. "Good morning," he greeted her, but his expression was serious. "We need to talk, urgently." Marina approached, noticing that Edward seemed to have aged years in a single night. "What happened?" she asked. Edward showed her a document that made her blood run cold, a notice of termination for cause, dated that morning and signed by Robert as interim president. "He's trying to get me out of the company," Edward said in a controlled voice, claiming mental instability and decisions harmful to Ecotech's business. Marina read the document with growing indignation. The accusations were cruel and calculated. Erratic post-traumatic behavior, questionable financial decisions, refusal to cooperate with necessary administrative procedures. "Can he do this?" Marina asked. "Legally, it's complicated," Edward explained. "He has powers for administrative acts that I signed when I was in the hospital, before suspecting anything. A competent lawyer could challenge this, but it will take time we don't have." Marina sat down, absorbing the gravity of the situation. "And what about me?" Edward showed her a second document, a notice of contract termination for inappropriate behavior and violation of company security protocols. "He is pushing us away from any position that would allow us to continue investigating," Marina realized. "Exactly," Edward confirmed. "But there's something more." He opened his laptop and showed a series of emails he had managed to access through a backup system that Robert was unaware of. "I accessed the company's correspondence files overnight," Edward explained, "and I discovered something that completely changes our understanding of the situation." Marina leaned in to read the screen. What she saw left her speechless. The emails were correspondence between Robert and representatives of a foreign company called European Energy Solutions, dated over a year ago, long before Edward's accident. They discussed in detail a plan to acquire Ecotech through internal destabilization and artificial reduction of market value. "They planned everything from the beginning," Marina whispered, incredulous. Including the accident," Edward completed in a grim voice. Marina reread the emails more carefully. Although there was no explicit reference to sabotaging the helicopter, there were concerning mentions of accelerating the timeline through unforeseen events and taking advantage of personal vulnerability situations. "Edward," she said cautiously, "have you technically investigated what caused the accident?" "The official investigation pointed to mechanical failure," Edward replied. "But I never questioned the details. I was too busy dealing with the loss of Helen and my own recovery." Marina felt a rage growing in her chest. The possibility that the accident that killed Helen and incapacitated Edward was the result of sabotage was too monstrous to contemplate. But the emails suggested that Robert was capable of anything. "We need to take all this to the police," Marina said firmly. "We can't," Edward replied. "Look at the date of the last email." Marina checked and saw that the most recent correspondence was just 2 days ago. Robert informed the foreign partners that the final obstacles would be removed within 48 hours and that the transfer of control would be executed as planned. 48 hours, Marina calculated. "That means tonight," Edward completed. "Whatever Robert is planning, it will happen tonight." The intercom buzzed, interrupting the conversation. Martha's voice sounded tense. "Mr. Edward, Mr. Caldwell is coming up with lawyers and security. He said he's here to take possession of the office." Edward and Marina exchanged glances. Time had run out. "Martha," Edward replied through the intercom, "tell them I will be there in 5 minutes. And thank you for everything over the years." Edward turned to Marina with urgency. "You need to get out of here now." "Use the emergency stairs, not the elevator." "And you?" Marina asked. "I will face them here," Edward replied with renewed determination. "But first, you will leave and take all this evidence to a safe place." Edward quickly copied all the important files to a flash drive and handed it to Marina along with a business card. "Dr. Henry Adams," he said. "Criminal lawyer, one of the best in New York. A former college colleague and one of the few people I can still completely trust. Go directly to his office and tell him everything." Marina took the flash drive and the card, but hesitated. "Edward, I can't just leave you here. You are not abandoning me," Edward replied, gently touching her hand. "You are saving everything we fought for. If I get arrested or prevented from acting, you will be our only hope." The sound of voices in the hallway was getting closer. Edward turned to the panoramic window and watched the movement on the street below. "Marina," he said without turning, "thank you for reminding me of who I am, for giving me back the will to fight." Marina felt tears burning her eyes. "We will solve this, Edward. I promise." "I know we will," he replied, finally turning to look at her. "Now go and be very careful. Robert is desperate, and desperate people are dangerous." Marina quickly exited through the back door of the office, heading for the emergency stairs. As she descended the 42 floors, she heard echoes of raised voices coming from the floor she had just left. On the street, she paused for a moment to gather her thoughts. She knew that from this moment on there was no turning back. Robert had forced an open confrontation, and she would need to use all the evidence they had collected to expose the conspiracy before it was too late. Looking back one last time at the building where it all began, Marina saw movement in the windows of the 42nd floor. Figures were moving in Edward's office, and she silently prayed for his safety. With the flash drive and the lawyer's card firmly in her hands, Marina headed to the nearest bus stop. There was a battle to win, and she had no intention of losing it. While waiting for the bus, her phone vibrated with a text message from an unknown number. "Marina, if you value your family, forget everything you saw and disappear. This is your last chance." Marina deleted the message without replying and boarded the bus when it arrived. Her determination only strengthened with the threat. Robert had underestimated who he was dealing with. The insecure employee who had arrived at Ecotech a few weeks ago was no longer there. In her place stood a woman who had discovered her strength and had no intention of backing down in the face of any intimidation. The war had officially begun, and Marina Morgan was ready to fight. Dr. Henry Adams's office was located on the 10th floor of a classic building on Augusta Street, a construction from the 1940s that retained the architectural charm of New York. Marina climbed the worn marble stairs, noticing the wrought iron details that adorned the railing. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the USB drive containing enough evidence to take down Robert Caldwell. "I need to speak urgently with Dr. Henry," Marina said to the receptionist, a woman in her 40s with red hair and discreet glasses. "The doctor is in a meeting," the receptionist replied politely. "I can schedule for—" "It's about Edward Morgan," Marina interrupted. "It's a criminal emergency." The mention of Edward's name made the receptionist raise her eyebrows and pick up the phone immediately. "Dr. Henry, a young woman is here about the Edward Morgan case. She says it's urgent." The receptionist spoke discreetly into the phone. Minutes later, a tall, thin man appeared at the reception. Dr. Henry Adams was about 50 years old, with grey hair slicked back, thin-rimmed glasses, and an air of seriousness that inspired immediate confidence. His navy blue suit was impeccable, but his eyes revealed concern. "You must be Marina Morgan," he said, extending his hand. "Edward called me an hour ago saying you might show up here. Come, let's talk privately." Dr. Henry's office was cozy, with shelves filled with legal codes, an antique wooden desk, and 2 leather armchairs arranged near a window that offered a partial view of downtown New York. "Edward quickly told me about your situation," Dr. Henry began, indicating an armchair for Marina. "But I need you to tell me everything from the beginning, without omitting any details." Marina took a deep breath and began to narrate the entire story. From her arrival at Ecotech, the discovery of suspicious documents, the investigation they conducted, the threats they received, and finally, the email suggesting that Robert had been planning everything for over a year. Dr. Henry listened attentively, occasionally jotting down notes on a pad of paper. When Marina finished, he remained silent for a few minutes, analyzing the information. "The evidence you brought is substantial," he finally said, "but there is a significant problem." Marina felt her stomach tighten. "What problem?" "Edward no longer has the legal authority to hire my services," Dr. Henry explained. "Robert obtained a court order 2 hours ago, temporarily removing Edward from the presidency of the company on the grounds of temporary mental incapacity." "Is that possible?" Marina asked incredulously. "Unfortunately, yes. Robert presented questionable medical reports and witnesses who claimed that Edward had been showing erratic behavior since the accident. The judge granted a 48-hour order for evaluation of the situation." Marina stood up from the armchair, walking to the window. Down below, the hustle and bustle of downtown New York continued normally, people going about their lives unaware of the conspiracy unfolding in the city's corporate offices. "So, Robert won?" she asked bitterly. "Not necessarily," Dr. Henry replied. "There is something you still don't know." Marina turned around, noticing a change in the lawyer's expression. "Before Edward lost his legal authority, he made a very smart decision," Dr. Henry continued. "He temporarily transferred all his shares of Ecotech to someone he completely trusts." Marina felt a chill in her stomach. To whom? Dr. Henry smiled for the first time since she arrived. "To you, Marina Morgan." The world seemed to stop for a moment. Marina leaned against the window, trying to process what she had just heard. "This is impossible," she finally managed to say. "I'm just an employee. How can he?" "Edward Morgan owns 51% of Ecotech," Dr. Henry explained. "As president and majority shareholder, he has the legal right to transfer his shares to anyone of his choice, even temporarily." Dr. Henry opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out an official document. "This transfer was legally registered this morning, 1 hour before Robert's order went into effect," he said, handing the papers to Marina. "Technically, you are now the interim president and largest shareholder of Ecotech." Marina read the document with growing astonishment. Her name was listed as the owner of 51% of the company's shares, with full executive powers to make administrative and financial decisions. "But I don't understand anything about business management," Marina protested. "How could Edward trust something so important to me?" "Because," Dr. Henry replied calmly, "you are the only person in the company who has demonstrated absolute integrity and courage to confront corruption. Edward believes that your honesty and determination are more valuable than administrative experience." Marina sat back down, feeling the weight of responsibility on her young shoulders. "What does this mean in practice?" she asked. It means that you now have the legal power to reverse all of Robert's decisions, including your own dismissal and Edward's. You can hire independent auditors to investigate the company's finances, revoke powers of attorney, and most importantly, prevent the sale of Ecotech. Marina quickly thought about the implications. And Robert, can he contest this transfer? He can try, Dr. Henry admitted, but it will take time, and in the meantime, you will have the legal authority to act. The lawyer stood up and went to his shelf, pulling out a commercial code. Marina, he said seriously, you need to understand. Accepting this responsibility will put you in an even more dangerous position. Robert will not hesitate to use all available resources to regain control of the company. Marina thought of her family. Constance working at the hospital, Julia studying to become a doctor, the simple yet dignified dreams they had always held. She also thought of Edward, who had trusted her when no one else believed in her leadership abilities. "What do I need to do?" she asked with renewed determination. Dr. Henry smiled, recognizing the same courage he had seen in Edward years ago. "First, we need to go to the courthouse to officially register your position as president of the company. Then, you will return to Ecotech, not as a fugitive employee, but as the legitimate president." Marina felt a mix of fear and excitement. "And what about the evidence we collected? We will present everything to the district attorney's office today," Dr. Henry replied. "With you as the president of the company, we have the legal authority to request a full investigation into Ecotech's finances." During the drive to the courthouse, Marina called home. Constance answered on the second ring. "Mom," Marina said, "I need to tell you something important." "Daughter, your voice sounds strange. Is something wrong?" Marina took a deep breath. "A lot has happened, but I want you to know that I'm fine and everything will be okay." "Marina Morgan, you're worrying me," Constance said, in a maternal tone that allowed no evasions. "Mom, I just became the president of a company," Marina said simply. The silence on the other end lasted several long seconds. "What do you mean, daughter?" Constance finally asked. "It's a long story, but I want you and Julia to stay home tonight. Don't go out for any reason, and if anyone strange shows up, call the police immediately." "Marina, you're scaring me." "There's no reason to be afraid, Mom. I just need you to be safe while I resolve a situation at work." After hanging up, Marina turned to Dr. Henry, who had listened to the conversation. "Did I do the right thing?" she asked. "You did," he replied. "Your family will be safe. I've arranged for discreet police protection for them." Marina looked at him in surprise. "You did that?" "Edward asked me to. He feels responsible for involving you in this situation." At the courthouse, the procedures were quick but formal. Marina signed dozens of documents, solemnly swore to perform her duties with honesty and integrity, and officially assumed the presidency of Ecotech. "Now," Dr. Henry said as they left the courthouse, "you're ready for the hardest part." "What part?" "Facing Robert Caldwell on his own turf." Marina looked up at the sky in New York, where the first clouds of the afternoon were beginning to form. She knew a storm was coming, literally and figuratively. But for the first time since everything began, she felt she was in control of her own destiny. The young engineer who had arrived nervously at Ecotech weeks ago had transformed into the youngest president of a sustainable technology company in the United States, and she was determined to use this position to seek justice. "Let's end this once and for all," she said, heading towards the car that Dr. Henry had called. The final battle was about to begin. The corporate tower had never seemed so imposing as it did that Thursday afternoon. Marina arrived at the lobby accompanied by Dr. Henry and 2 court officers, carrying a briefcase of documents that proved her new legal position. The security guard at the front desk, the same man who had greeted her warmly on her first day, looked at her in surprise as she introduced herself. "Good afternoon, Mr. Antonio," Marina said, showing the official documents. "I am the new president of Ecotech. We need to go up to the 42nd floor." Mr. Antonio examined the papers carefully, comparing the photo in the documents with Marina's face. His expression revealed astonishment. After all, how could a young employee have become president? In just a matter of days. "Everything seems to be in order, ma'am," he said respectfully, though his voice showed confusion. "The elevators are at your disposal." During the ascent, Marina felt her stomach tighten with nerves. She knew Robert would be waiting for her. Dr. Henry had called ahead to inform him of her arrival to ensure everything was done legally. The elevator doors opened on the top floor, revealing a tense scene. Robert Caldwell stood in the center of the reception area, accompanied by 3 dark-suited lawyers and 2 private security guards. His expression mixed, contained anger with disbelief. "Marina Morgan," Robert said, pronouncing her name as if it were an insult. "What an impressive performance for a low-level employee." "President Morgan," Dr. Henry corrected firmly, "and I suggest you treat the new president of the company with the respect she deserves." Robert laughed bitterly. "President? A girl who 3 weeks ago didn't even know where the bathroom was in this company?" Marina took a deep breath, recalling the advice Dr. Henry had given during the drive. "Stay calm, be assertive but respectful, and always act within the law." "Mr. Caldwell," Marina said in a firm voice, "I appreciate your years of service to Ecotech, but from now on, I officially assume the presidency of the company. Your services are no longer needed." "You can't fire me," Robert exploded, losing the composure he had been trying to maintain. "I built this company alongside Edward. I have contracts. I have rights." Dr. Henry stepped forward, presenting a copy of the official documents to Robert's lawyers. "As you can verify, the transfer of shares was done legally before the injunction that removed Mr. Morgan. Ms. Morgan has full authority to restructure the company's management." As the lawyers examined the documents, Marina watched Robert carefully. There was something in his expression that went beyond anger. It was panic. He knew his facade was about to be exposed. "Where is Edward?" Marina asked. "In a safe place," Robert replied evasively, "being properly cared for due to his unstable mental condition." Marina felt a wave of anger but managed to keep it under control. "I want to see him now." "That won't be possible," one of the lawyers of Robert intervened. "Mr. Morgan is under medical care and cannot receive visitors." Dr. Henry smiled coldly. "In fact, he can and will be brought to him immediately. The company president has a legal right to check on the well-being of her employees, especially when there are suspicions of coercion." Robert exchanged nervous glances with his lawyers. Marina realized they did not expect her to arrive with such solid legal backing. "Very well," Robert conceded reluctantly. "But it will be a brief and supervised visit." They descended to the 38th floor, where Robert had improvised a sort of temporary office for Edward. When Marina entered the room, she found Edward sitting behind a small desk, clearly being watched by a private security guard. "Marina?" Edward exclaimed, evident relief in his voice. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Marina replied, approaching him. "And you? Did they hurt you?" "Not physically," Edward said, casting a loaded glance at Robert. "But let's just say they made me a very clear offer: quietly accept the sale of the company or face accusations of mental instability and possible involuntary commitment." Robert quickly intervened. "Edward is clearly delusional. This is a result of the post-accident trauma we've been trying to treat." Marina turned to Robert with an expression that made him involuntarily step back. "Mr. Caldwell," she said in a cold voice, "your coup attempt ends now. Dr. Henry, can you proceed with the charges?" Dr. Henry gestured to the justice officials, who stepped forward with search and seizure warrants. Robert Caldwell, one of the officials announced, you are being charged with embezzlement, forgery, corporate fraud, and coercion. You have the right to remain silent. Robert's face lost all color. Wait, you don't understand. I was saving the company. Edward was incapacitated. Someone had to make decisions. Decisions like diverting $12 million to shell companies? Marina asked, her voice heavy with contempt. Robert fell silent, realizing he had inadvertently confessed. Dr. Henry opened his briefcase and pulled out copies of the emails Marina had uncovered. We have evidence that you conspired with foreign investors to destabilize Ecotech long before Mr. Morgan's accident. That proves nothing, Robert stammered. It proves that you planned everything over a year ago, Marina continued relentlessly, including taking advantage of Edward's vulnerability after he lost his wife. Robert made a desperate last-ditch attempt. You can't prove I planned the accident. That's just coincidence. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert realized too late that he had revealed knowledge of something no one had mentioned. No one said anything about you planning the accident, Robert, Edward said slowly, his voice heavy with pain and anger. But it's interesting that you took that defensive stance. Dr. Henry made a note in his pad. Thank you for the confession, Mr. Caldwell. This will be very useful for the criminal investigation. The justice officials moved in to effect the arrest, but Robert still tried to resist. You don't know who you're dealing with, he shouted. I have connections, I have protection. This company is worth a fortune, and there are very powerful people interested in it. And now we know exactly who those people are, Marina replied calmly. All your contacts, all the transfers, all the plans are documented in the emails you so carefully filed. Robert was handcuffed and escorted out of the building, still protesting his innocence and making empty threats. His lawyers quickly followed, clearly trying to distance themselves from a case that had become untenable. When the commotion finally ceased, Marina found herself alone with Edward in his office. The silence between them was charged with emotion, relief, exhaustion, and something deeper that neither of them was ready to name. You did this, Edward said softly. You saved the company. You saved me. We did this, Marina corrected. You were the one who trusted me when no one else would. Edward moved his chair closer to hers, taking her hands in his. Marina, he said, his voice heavy with emotion, I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me, Marina interrupted. Just help me rebuild this company the right way. Edward smiled, the first genuine and complete smile Marina had seen since she met him. It will be an honor, Madam President, he said. Marina laughed, feeling the weight of the past few days finally dissipating. I think I still have a lot to learn about being president, she admitted. Fortunately, Edward replied, you will have the best possible advisor. As the sun set over New York, casting golden hues through the office windows, Marina and Edward began to plan the future of Ecotech. It wouldn't be easy to rebuild everything Robert had damaged, but for the first time in months, they both felt genuine hope. The battle had been won, but the real adventure was just beginning. 3 months had passed since the arrest of Robert Caldwell, and Ecotech was beginning to show clear signs of recovery. Marina arrived every day at 7 in the morning, an hour before Edward, to review financial reports and plan the day's activities. Her desk, now located in the presidential office, was always organized with military precision, a trait she had developed during years of studying under limited conditions. Good morning, Madam President, Martha greeted every morning with a genuine maternal smile. The secretary had quickly adapted to the new dynamic, admiring Marina's dedication and humility. Good morning, Martha. Any news from Dr. Henry about the case? Marina invariably asked, still concerned about the legal developments of Robert's case. He called early. He wants to speak with you at 10, Martha replied, organizing the day's agenda. The recovery of the company had not been simple. Marina discovered that the damage caused by Robert went far beyond financial diversions. Important contracts had been sabotaged, key employees had been fired or demoralized, and Ecotech's reputation in the market was severely compromised. How are we going to regain our clients' trust? Marina had asked Edward during one of their morning meetings. By making what we've always done best, Edward replied, his energy and passion for work clearly renewed. Genuine innovation and a real commitment to sustainability. Edward had insisted on remaining as vice president and technical director, claiming that Marina had demonstrated leadership abilities he never possessed. They worked in perfect harmony, she with her analytical vision and iron determination, he with his deep technical experience and knowledge. "Marina," Edward said one December morning, entering her office with an excited expression she had learned to recognize as a sign of a new discovery. "I need to show you something amazing." He carried a folder with designs that the engineering team had developed in recent weeks. "Remember the solar capture project you mentioned in your thesis?" Edward asked, spreading technical drawings across the table. "Of course," Marina replied, her curiosity piqued. "The team managed to refine your original idea. We've developed integrated solar panels that are 40% more efficient than anything available on the market." Marina examined the drawings with growing excitement. The engineers had taken her theoretical concept and turned it into viable technology with the potential to revolutionize the residential energy market in the United States. "This is incredible," she exclaimed. "When can we start production?" "That's the problem," Edward admitted. "We need significant investment to set up the production line. We're talking about at least $5 million. Marina became thoughtful. Ecotech was recovering financially, but still lacked capital for investments of that magnitude. "What if we look for external investors?" she suggested. "We can try," Edward agreed. "But after the scandal with Robert, many investors are still skeptical about the company." It was then that Marina had a bold idea. "What if we do it differently?" she said slowly, her mind racing. "What if, instead of looking for big investors, we sought crowdfunding? Show the market that Ecotech has truly changed?" Edward looked at her with renewed interest. "Explain." "We could launch a crowdfunding campaign specifically for this project. Not just to raise money, but to demonstrate total transparency. Show every step of the development, involve the public in the process." Edward smiled, recognizing the same creativity he had admired since the first day he met her. "It's risky," he noted. "If we don't raise the necessary amount, then at least we tried something different," Marina finished. "Something that shows we are a new company with different values." They spent the next few weeks developing the crowdfunding campaign. Marina discovered she had a natural talent for communication, creating explanatory videos that combined technical rigor with a contagious passion for sustainability. "You should consider giving presentations at universities," Edward suggested, after watching one of the videos Marina had recorded. "You have a gift for making complex concepts accessible." During this time, their relationship evolved naturally. It was no longer just a professional partnership. It had become a deep friendship based on mutual respect and shared goals. Edward admired Marina's determination and integrity, while she valued his experience and ability to see possibilities where others saw only obstacles. "Marina," Edward said one Friday afternoon, as they worked late preparing for the campaign launch, "can I ask you a personal question?" "Sure," Marina replied, looking up from the spreadsheet she was analyzing. "Don't you miss having a normal social life? Dating? Going out with friends? You're dedicating so much time to the company." Marina stopped typing and considered the question carefully. "You know," she said slowly, "I've never had much time for a traditional social life. Between studying, working, and taking care of family, there have always been other priorities. And now," Marina looked around the office that had become her second home, then at Edward, who had become not just a boss, but a confidant and friend. "Now I feel like I'm exactly where I need to be," she answered honestly. "Doing something that matters, with people who matter to me." Edward was silent for a moment, processing her words. "You said people who matter to you," he observed softly. Marina felt her heart race, realizing the direction the conversation was taking. "Edward," she began cautiously. "I know there are differences between us," Edward continued, his voice heavy with emotion. "Age, life experience, financial situation. I also know that I'm still recovering from losing Helen. Marina watched him carefully, seeing the vulnerability he rarely showed. But, Edward continued, you've given me back something I thought I had lost forever. Not just the will to work, but the will to live. Hope for the future. Edward, Marina whispered. You don't have to answer now, he hurried to say. I just wanted you to know how I feel. Marina stood up and walked to the window, watching the lights of New York begin to flicker on in the growing darkness. You know I feel something special too, she said without turning around. But you're right about the differences between us. And does that worry you? Edward asked. Marina turned to face him. I'm worried about not being enough for someone like you. I'm worried that people will see our relationship as opportunism on my part. Edward moved his chair closer to her. Marina Morgan, he said firmly, you are the most genuine person I have ever met. Anyone who questions your motivations simply doesn't know you. Marina felt tears welling in her eyes. And Helen? You loved her for 20 years. How can I compete with that memory? Edward took her hands in his. You're not competing with Helen. She was an important part of my life, and she always will be. But you are my present and my future. In that moment, Marina realized she had fallen in love not only with the vulnerable man she had met months ago, but with the reborn leader Edward had become while working alongside her. We need to take it slow, she said softly. All the time in the world, Edward agreed, gently kissing her hands. The following weekend, Marina took Edward to meet her family in East New York. The visit was revealing. Constance received Edward with respectful but cautious politeness, while Julia asked direct questions about his intentions regarding her sister. Dr. Edward, Constance said during the simple yet lovingly prepared lunch, my daughter is special. She has always been the most responsible, the most dedicated. I know, Mrs. Constance, Edward replied sincerely. She has completely changed my life. Julia, always straightforward, asked, are you interested in Marina for who she is, or out of gratitude for what she has done? Edward considered the question seriously before responding. It started as gratitude, I won't lie. But it evolved into admiration, then into genuine love. Your sister taught me that second chances can be even more valuable than first opportunities. At the end of the visit, Constance pulled Marina aside. Daughter, she said, that man looks at you the way your father looked at me, with respect, admiration, and true love. But, Mom, the differences in money are temporary, Constance interrupted. Differences in character are permanent. You both have the same character. That night, when Edward drove her back home, a hybrid Civic that he insisted on buying to reduce his carbon footprint, Marina knew she was ready to give the relationship a real chance. Thank you for today, she said when they arrived at the building. Thank you for letting me meet your family, Edward replied. Now I understand where your strength comes from. Marina leaned in and gently kissed his cheek. Let's see what the future holds for us, Edward Morgan. I'm looking forward to finding out. Marina Morgan. As Marina climbed the stairs to her apartment, she felt that she was finally balancing all parts of her life, family, career, and now perhaps true love. 6 months later, the headquarters of Ecotech buzzed with an energy that hadn't been seen in years. The office had been completely renovated. Dark walls replaced with glass, and structures that allowed maximum natural light. Tropical plants adorned every floor, and solar panels developed by the company itself powered 80% of the building's energy. Marina walked through the hallways on a Monday morning, observing employees engaged in lively discussions about projects, young engineers presenting innovative ideas, and an overall atmosphere of optimism that contrasted dramatically with what she had found a year ago. Good morning, President Marina, greeted Carlos Henry, the veteran engineer who had stayed with the company during the crisis. The prototypes of the new panels have arrived from the lab. Excellent, Carlos. Schedule a presentation for this afternoon, Marina replied, her confidence as a leader now natural and genuine. The crowdfunding campaign had been a resounding success. Not only had they raised the $5 million needed, but they had collected $8.5 million, demonstrating that the American public was thirsty for genuine, sustainable innovation. The radical transparency that Marina had implemented, showing every step of development, every expense, every decision, had created a loyal consumer base that felt part of the energy revolution. "Marina," Edward called from his office, which was now adjacent to hers, separated only by a glass wall. "You need to see the latest sales." Marina entered and found Edward smiling at his computer, his eyes shining with an enthusiasm that had become constant in recent months. 500 units sold in the first week," Edward announced triumphantly. "And that's just pre-sales, even before mass production starts." Marina leaned in to see the numbers on the screen, inadvertently resting her hand on the arm of Edward's chair. He, in turn, gently touched her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them over the months. "That means the production line will pay for itself in less than 6 months, Marina calculated quickly. "And that we can invest in the next project," Edward added. "That energy storage system you designed." Their relationship had evolved organically and respectfully. There had been no rush, dramatic declarations, or grand gestures. Instead, it had grown through shared projects, challenges overcome together, and simple yet meaningful moments. 2 weeks ago, during a trip to a technology fair in San Diego, they had walked along the beach after an intense day of presentations. It was there, with their feet in the sand and the sound of the waves in the background, that Edward finally confessed he was completely in love with her. "Marina," he had said, stopping to face her, "I can't imagine my life without you anymore. Not just as a work partner, but as everything." Marina had felt her heart race, but also a deep peace. "I love you too, Edward, more than I thought possible." They kissed for the first time there on the beach, a soft kiss full of future promises, witnessed only by the stars and the sea. "Mr. Edward, Miss Marina," Martha interrupted Marina's thoughts, appearing at the door with a mysterious expression. "You have special visitors in the reception." Marina and Edward went down to the ground floor, where they found an impressive delegation, the Minister of Mines and Energy, the Secretary of Technological Innovation of the state of New York, and representatives from the National Electric Energy Agency. "Mr. Morgan, Ms. Marina," the minister approached with a cordial smile, "I came personally to congratulate you on the exceptional work you are doing. Ecotech has become a national reference in sustainable innovation." Marina felt a mix of pride and responsibility. "Thank you, Mr. Minister. We are just getting started." "Actually," the Innovation Secretary interjected, "we came to propose a partnership. The government is launching a national clean energy program, and we would like Ecotech to be our anchor company." Edward and Marina exchanged looks of surprise and excitement. "This would involve significant expansion," the minister explained. "Factories in at least 3 states, generating thousands of jobs and potential for export to Latin America." "It would be an honor," Marina replied, her voice steady despite the emotion. "But while maintaining our principles of transparency and social responsibility." "Of course," the minister agreed. "It's precisely because of those principles that we chose you." After the meeting, Marina and Edward found themselves alone in the office, absorbing the implications of the government proposal. "A year ago, this company was on the brink of bankruptcy," Edward marveled. "Now we are being invited to lead a national program. Do you believe we are ready?" Marina asked. Edward approached her, taking her hands in his. "I believe you're ready for anything, Marina Morgan." Marina smiled, reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From an insecure employee to the president of a rapidly rising company, from a young woman worried only about paying bills to a national leader in sustainability. "I have a confession," Edward said softly. "What is it?" "A few weeks ago I visited Helen's grave," Edward revealed. "I told her about you, about how you saved me not just professionally, but as a person." Marina felt tears welling up in her eyes. "And do you know what I felt?" Edward continued. "Complete peace, as if she were approving, blessing us." "Edward, I want to marry you, Marina," he said simply. Not because I need you to save the company, or because I am grateful for what you've done. I want to marry you, because you are my best friend, my partner, my daily inspiration." Marina was silent for a moment, processing the proposal. She thought of her family, who had embraced Edward wholeheartedly. Constance treated him like a son, and Julia often joked that she finally had a brother-in-law who could help her with college tuition. "Edward Morgan," Marina finally said, "are you sure you want to marry a woman who will challenge you daily, who insists on complete transparency, and who will probably turn our home into a sustainability lab?" Edward laughed, the sound echoing through the office. "I would expect nothing less from you." "Then yes," Marina replied, throwing herself into his arms. "Yes, I accept your proposal." 3 months later, they married in a simple yet meaningful ceremony in the garden of the home they had purchased together in a sustainable community in New York. The home, fully powered by solar energy and built with eco-friendly materials, perfectly symbolized the union of their lives and values. Constance cried throughout the ceremony, proud of her daughter, who had exceeded all expectations. Julia served as maid of honor, delivering an emotional speech about second chances and true love. Dr. Henry officiated the wedding, declaring that he had never seen two people more suited for each other. "You have proven that no matter how dark the night may seem," Dr. Henry said during the ceremony, "there is always the possibility of a new dawn." A year after the wedding, Marina was 6 months pregnant when Ecotech became the first sustainable energy company in Brazil to go public with 100% financial transparency. The company now employed over 2,000 people across 4 states and exported technology to 12 countries. "What shall we name our daughter?" Edward asked one night as he stroked Marina's belly on the sofa in their home. "Helen Marina," Marina replied without hesitation, "to honor the past and celebrate the future." Edward smiled, kissing her forehead. "Perfect." Marina looked around their home, decorated with photos of the Morgan family, Ecotech awards, and portraits of Helen that Edward had insisted on keeping so their daughter would know about the special woman who had helped shape her father's character. The complete transformation had happened because both were willing to be vulnerable, to work hard, and to believe that the future could be better than the past. Marina Morgan, the young engineer who had arrived nervously at Ecotech with a plain paper resume, had become one of the most respected business leaders in the United States. Edward Morgan, the man who had lost everything and found the strength to start over, discovered that second chances can be even more powerful than first opportunities. Their story became an inspiration not only within the company, but throughout the American business sector, proving that authenticity, determination, and true love can overcome any adversity. And as Marina fell asleep in Edward's arms that night, Helen Marina gently kicking in her belly, she knew that her life had found its perfect purpose, to build a sustainable future for the next generation, alongside the man who had taught her that wounded hearts, when they find the right love, can become even stronger.